Translation: Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Extreme Rules 2015. So if you follow me on Facebook, and I know you do, you might have noticed that I've been late in producing my written reviews of the various Raws and SmackDowns leading up to this pay-per-view event. There are a few reasons for this, the first being that Hulu usually takes an extra day to release these programs, and that's obviously going to put me behind anyway. However, the primary reason is that I have not enjoyed the product lately. I've found the match quality to be mostly underwhelming, acceptable but unexceptional. I did not enjoy the UK tour at all for some reason. And then I found the build-up to, this big match card to be incredibly bizarre and not compelling at all. There are exceptions, but it's just been so awkwardly paced that, it's been a chore to sit down and view these episodes. It's taken me 2 to 3 days to finish them, and obviously that's going to make me really late, and by the time I, finally get my opinions up, nobody's going to care by then. So, the past 2 weeks, I ended up clumping together my opinions towards, the final 3 shows, which I just used a single word: mediocre. Nothing really worth, hating on, nothing overtly terrible, but at the same time, there was very little to praise as well. So obviously that's going to really put a damper on my expectations for Extreme Rules. I wasn't really looking forward to it, in total contrast to WrestleMania, which, while having a very poor build-up itself, at least had an interesting match card. But, I was going to watch it anyway, and I did. And thank God, this is the first time where the network didn't give me connection problems. Usually I'd get kicked out of being able to watch it at least once or twice, and I'd have to, get back in there, and it would always be a pain because I'd always feel like I'm missing something, and I'd have to go back and watch it later on. But nah, this time it wasn't. I never had any problems with my internet connection. But the reception towards Extreme Rules has been lukewarm positive. Almost everybody agrees that it was an okay event, but nothing spectacular. Oddly, I kind of feel like I enjoyed it more than most people. And I feel a little strange for doing so because, for the most part, I was not emotionally involved in any of these matches. And I'll discuss why when I get to each and every single feud. But it was just an all-around entertaining show. There were some lackluster pairings, but at the same time, they tend to evaporate from my mind whenever I think about Extreme Rules. I think of the high points, and I forget about the low points because, even the weaker parts weren't that bad. However, this was a very flawed event just in terms of its premise, because if the overarching theme of WrestleMania 31 was the rising stars don't shine quite as brightly as the fading stars, the theme here is the storylines have very little to do with the payoffs, in essence, these matches. So let's go ahead and bring up what occurred, and I'll discuss each and every one individually. So the pre-show was Neville vs. Bad News Barrett. Originally, it was going to be the Tag Team Championship match. I don't know why they couldn't have put somebody else here, like Sheamus vs. Ziggler. I always prefer the championship matches to be on the main card, but that's just me. But there was obviously going to be a problem with Daniel Bryan. Apparently he had been injured a few weeks ago, and they weren't really sure whether he was going to make it to this matchup, so they pulled him and put Neville in his place. The Intercontinental Championship has nothing to do with this, and that is the pre-show event match. So here's my issue: is I feel they should have warned us in advance a lot earlier. I kind of felt cheated not knowing whether Brian would show up until I sat down and started watching. I just don't see how that was a good idea, as it feels like they're tricking some viewers into checking out this show, especially if they just want to see Daniel Bryan. I mean, yeah, Neville's a good replacement, but, I like Daniel Bryan a lot more. Most other people like Daniel Bryan a lot more. They want to see Daniel Bryan, and, we're not going to blame the WWE for pulling him if he's not in the condition to perform, but we would have liked a little bit more of a warning. So I don't know what they're going to do with him and his belt. Are they going to just let him keep it while he takes a month or two off? Will he vacate it again? In retrospect, I'm beginning to understand why WWE is so reluctant to let him have a real title reign, considering, he's unfortunately becoming more and more injury prone. However, let's pretend that this didn't happen, that Daniel Bryan would have been in perfect health and would have shown up and had his match with Barrett. I'm presuming Bryan would have won, but that's obviously irrelevant now. It just didn't seem like there was a real feud going on here. Barrett, I think, is a wonderful performer. He's an excellent talker, has lots of charisma, has a good moveset, can perform in the ring, has a distinct appearance. He can be a main eventer if the booking really worked in his favor. Unfortunately, not only did he go into WrestleMania on a losing streak, he, I think, lost almost every match leading into that pay-per-view event, and even going into Fastlane, he was losing to guys such as R-Truth and Sin Cara, even though he'd ultimately win in the rematches. So he just seems so weak right now. And what I think is even worse than that is WrestleMania was the Intercontinental feud was built around Ziggler and Daniel Bryan, neither of whom were the champion at that time. So Barrett, the actual champion, just felt like another guy who happened to be there. Now, if he'd won, that could have, I think, reestablished his credibility, but he didn't, so he just seems so irrelevant right now. And this feud sucked because Bryan and Barrett, they rarely interacted with each other, and I think part of that is the UK tour because, Barrett's going to be received as a face over there, so they're going to put him against The Miz, or at least John Cena, who, they don't like over there. And Bryan, on the other end, he just went on. I think he had his match with Cena against the tag team champions. So, once again, it really didn't feel like there was a program between these two. It just, they went and did their own separate stuff, but then would show up to have this big match on Extreme Rules. I don't like that kind of booking. I don't like that kind of writing. I think there were other ways they could have pulled this off. But even beyond that, Barrett needs to be rebuilt, unfortunately. And that's not going to be an easy task to pull off. But anyway, Neville and Barrett have had sort of I don't know if I'd say a mini rivalry. Neville's been getting in these confrontations with Barrett and Sheamus. So yeah, I understand why they put him in that position. And it was a good match, nothing phenomenal. It seems like Neville's slowing down his style somewhat, and I have mixed opinions about that. On one hand, NXT just has a much faster paced style of wrestling where Neville is able to shine a lot more. Whereas a lot of the main roster guys aren't really used to that, even if they were previously in NXT. However, I think it's also partially because there's all this controversy surrounding the various injuries within the WWE, and finally, they don't want Neville to be a spot monkey. They want him to have a prolonged career where he's able to show that he could do more than just fly around really fast. So I understand why they're doing that, and he's provided consistently good matches since going up to the main roster. There hasn't been a single stinker among them, and this was no exception. It's not his best match. It's a little underwhelming for a pay-per-view event match, even if it is the pre-show. But it was good work. Both men moved really well. They both looked strong. And when Neville picked up the victory, it meant something, even though, once again, Barrett has been booked as such a loser. And that's impressive in itself. Because, you know, like if Ambrose defeated Barrett, it wouldn't matter. But for some reason, maybe it's because Neville's just, you know, so new. When he picked up the upset, it felt important. Like, it can lead to bigger and better things. I would not be surprised if he somehow ended up scoring the Intercontinental Championship sooner than later. Now, moving on to the main card. All right, so we start with Dean Ambrose versus Luke Harper. And this was a really weird storyline, just in that there wasn't really a storyline. Luke Harper powerbombed Ambrose at WrestleMania, and apparently that was enough for them to start this program together. And I'm okay with that. We've seen that done many times before. However, like, I didn't really understand any of the animosity. That shit's going to happen in a pay-per-view match. Did Stardust hate Barrett because he got superplexed off the ladder? No. But, you know, so that's just strange. And it's like there's not a whole lot of promo time dedicated to their motivations here. It's just them constantly fighting each other. Now, this could be a good thing, even though I think Harper has been wasted on the mic. Because I think he is a much better talker than he appears. You know, he can make the few lines he says count, but, you know, this is an interesting pairing because they're both portrayed as really batshit insane, and you just kind of want to see them get together and tear each other apart. But I wasn't really sure who'd benefit from this because both men are in desperate need of a win. Ambrose is on a losing pay-per-view streak. Harper hasn't fared too much better. Like, the one time it seemed like he was getting a real push, which was when he was in, feuding with Ziggler for the Intercontinental Championship. He only won because he had help, and then he ended up losing cleanly to Ziggler once that help was taken away. So, you know, I don't really know how strong these people are supposed to be. It's like WWE is telling me that these guys are mid-carders. So what are the long-term plans? Will the winner move on to, onto the title scene and will be contender for the United States Championship or the Intercontinental Championship, regardless of, or I should say, depending on whoever, leaves with the belts tonight? Or is this going to be like a Rollins versus Ambrose feud where we're just supposed to be invested in the storyline, even though none of the championships have anything to do with said storyline? I don't know. That seems kind of strange just because, once again, there hasn't been a whole lot of screen time dedicated to it. However, they're both interesting performers, and I thought this would be a good match. And it was. It actually was, for the most part, an exceptional match early on. Very brutal, very fast-paced. I think they both have really good chemistry together. And then the match took a turn for the strange, because the fight ends up going backstage. And I'm thinking, all right, this is pretty awesome. And then they get into a car that just happens to be parked right there. I always think that's really silly when WWE does something like that. And then Harper tries to escape and drive off, but Ambrose jumps in the nick of time, and they both flee the scene. Fans are not happy about this. They're booing. I think I heard some CM Punk chants in there. So I'm like, that was really kind of a stupid finish. Well, 2 matches later, they actually return, and I liked how they kind of came back. And they continue their brawl. I thought this was a wasted opportunity because what I think they should have done is had the camera crew follow them and then just randomly cut through the rest of the show to these guys brawling in random public places. Like, remember back, I think, in the Attitude Era when Stone Cold and Booker T were feuding and they were like brawling in a store? Stuff like that I think would have been really cool, and they don't have to necessarily end it that quickly. They could just, after every single match, cut to a segment where they're still fighting each other. That's what I thought they were going to do, but instead they come back and they finish their match in a relatively anticlimactic fashion. So I disagreed with the finish, although I am glad that Ambrose won finally, ending his losing streak. And I'd be curious to see this feud continue as long as they continue to, amp up the stakes, make it more insane, make it crazier and very more unconventional, and where these guys will fight each other. You could have Luke Harper score some victories, so it feels like a much more competitive feud instead of just having Ambrose walk all over him. Not that this happened here, but I think in the next time they fight, Harper should win, unless this feud is over and Ambrose moves on to, going after a belt or something like that. I'd also like to see these guys after their feud maybe team up and become a tag team. That could be really interesting as well. I predicted Ambrose would win, so I was right. So like I said, really good match. Not great build-up, but acceptable build-up. And I'm curious to see where they go with this in the future, but I felt that the finish was pretty shitty. The next match was Dolph Ziggler versus Sheamus. Now, this was weird because at first I was sure they were going a Sheamus versus Daniel Bryan route, which just seemed to make more sense. And they had their match, I think, on SmackDown, and it was a phenomenal match. The only problem was it was a bit too rough. And this is probably where Daniel Bryan got injured. But they didn't go this route. I'm kind of glad because it probably would have left poor Daniel Bryan really considering retirement, even more so than he's probably thinking now. So instead, they go with Daniel Bryan Light, Dolph Ziggler, as Sheamus' opponent. This is kind of weird because I'm not a fan of Ziggler. I've said this before. I think he's consistent in terms of providing entertaining matches. I just find his personality to be really bland. Either he's wannabe Daniel Bryan or wannabe John Cena, but he just seems to lack charisma, and I find his storylines and character to be very uninvolving. Sheamus is interesting because I thought he was incredibly boring as a face. I could see him becoming compelling, but it always seemed like his desire to fight, he was a brawl lover, didn't mesh well with his overly nice, laid-back personality. I think he needed an edginess to him, and so when he came back, I was glad when he became a heel. Everybody says that he looks stupid. I think it's a combination of looking stupid and badass at once, which I think really works because it means fans aren't likely going to start cheering him because he's being presented as such a badass heel. And, for the most part, when he's shown up, I found all of his segments to be really entertaining. I like seeing him kind of cower out, even though the lack of continuity sort of annoys me. Like when Mark Henry confronts him and we're supposed to be like, yeah, Mark Henry, kick his ass. We never acknowledge that Mark Henry's the one who injured him, and they just revealed that his primary motivation was how he was pissed off that nobody seemed to notice that he was injured, and yet Mark Henry's now the good guy. But WWE and continuity are not good bedmates. So I really like what they've been doing with Sheamus. I think he's much more compelling as a heel than he is a face. And this is sort of a problem with him facing off against Ziggler because you have a bad guy who interests me and a good guy who doesn't, and yet the good guy can't really afford to lose, and yet nor can the bad guy. That's another thing with this booking, is I don't feel anybody could take this loss. However, I correctly predicted that Ziggler would win, but it would be like a stolen victory, almost kind of like a fluke. You're not really sure if this would happen more than once. But then instead of kissing Ziggler's ass, Sheamus would kick it. And therefore both men would be kind of protected. That was probably the right way to go, except I do not. Here's the thing. I actually thought this feud was reasonably compelling simply because of how Sheamus has portrayed his character. However, the kiss me arse thing, I hate that stipulation. It's undignifying, but not in a way that makes it satisfying whenever somebody wins. I always just think it's a little gay. meaning that this feud was probably the most homoerotic since Ambrose versus Rollins, where Ambrose had that sex doll with Rollins' face plastered on it, and he was talking about how he was going to screw it. That was really weird and uncomfortable. But here, it's like, here's the thing. I have disliked a lot of people in my life, and I, at times, may have wanted to really humiliate them. But I would never want to feel their lips pressed up against my butt cheek. Ugh, it's just weird. But I mean, wrestling in itself is already a little homoerotic, and this is just taking it too far. And that sort of undermines the badassery of Sheamus, because I don't think it's supposed to be intentional. Like, if Sheamus as a character just came out as gay, or Ziggler did the same thing, I'd be like, all right, that's actually very bold, and I respect WWE for doing this. As long as they don't start going really over the top and hammy with their mannerisms, because of course a gay character will always be a stereotype and flamboyant. But because they're supposed to be straight, I just can't take this seriously. So Ziggler fans are going to be pissed off because he's been humiliated, and while that does add some good heat for Sheamus, I do understand why Ziggler fanboys would be very upset with this, because, you know, Ziggler unfortunately is not being seen as anything more than talent enhancement by the higher-ups of WWE, and I personally agree with them. I think he's perfect mid-card material, but nothing more. But I also acknowledge that I am in the minority. The fact of the matter is, if a wrestler is this much over with the crowd, they do deserve that push, whether WWE management likes it or not, whether I like it or not. I can't ignore the crazy cheers he gets. He's just that popular. But the match itself, it was pretty good. You know, it was a typical Ziggler match. It was violent enough to please Sheamus fans, but it's also fast-paced enough to please Ziggler fans. I had no doubt that this would be a fun matchup, and it was. And I mostly agree with the finisher, but once again, I understand why it would bother some people. I don't think they should have had Sheamus pressing Ziggler's face against his rear end once again. I just can't help but think, yay! But I do think that, you know, Ziggler scored a meaningful win, while at the same time Sheamus retains his dignity by kicking the crap out of Ziggler instead of puckering up. In terms of the storyline, like I said, it was okay. It was just, I don't like that stipulation. The next we have, the New Day versus Tyson Kidd and Cesaro. Boy, did this baffle me when the New Day beat Lucha Dragons. I was sure that's where they were going, the Cesaro and Kidd versus Lucha Dragons. My concern with that was, I don't feel it's time for Cesaro and Kidd to drop the belts, and I feel that when the Lucha Dragons make their big pay-per-view debut, at least, you know, one team versus one team match. If they had like 4 different teams, I'd be okay if they lost. I don't think they should lose this quickly. I think they, if anything, they need to win the belts during their first big pay-per-view match. But this is what's so weird, is that the whole build-up to this event seemed to be focusing on the Lucha Dragons and their program with Cesaro and Kidd. Not much of a storyline here, it's just they're constantly fighting each other. And then the New Day comes and hijacks this storyline from the Lucha Dragons, and that confuses me because the New Day are not over. Now they're finally beginning to get over because, you know, now they're embracing the heel mannerisms somewhat. We're supposed to say New Day sucks instead of, you know, they're not trying to get us to cheer for them anymore. But I don't think they're quite ready yet. They needed at least another month before I could buy them as over enough to be, you know, worthy contenders. But then also it's just strange because we're supposed to be cheering for Cesaro and Kidd then, since we hate the New Day, and yet Cesaro and Kidd are still the bad guys. As far as I know, they have not made an official heel face turn. And I don't really want them to do that either. I don't want them to drop the belts yet. So at least when New Day got there, I figured, okay, Cesaro and Kid are going to win. They get more credibility to themselves and can resume being heels because, I think they make much more compelling villains than they do good guys. Even though we haven't really seen them as good guys yet, I'm not ready for that turn right now. I'm perfectly fine if they have that occurred a month or two, but that would just seem such a weird payoff. Since we're just finished with the whole Natalia bit where her and Kid were kind of teasing a breakup, but it never really happened. I thought that whole storyline kind of feels clusterfucky right now. I'm not sure if it's still ongoing and it's just not on the forefront, or if they're going to return to that, or if they're done with it. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but and not only would New Day lose, but this could also be the breaking point where they finally just snap and become crazy. And maybe they have, on the following night, they fight the Lucha Dragons, lose, and this is the point where now they fully become heels. They just start tearing apart the entire locker room. Good guys and bad guys, they aren't safe from the New Day, who have finally snapped. But much to my surprise, the New Day won. That seems really stupid to me. That would be like if the Ascension took the belts a week or two after they made their debut, to where back when fans weren't really sure whether they should like this team or hate this team or whether they should care at all. Eventually they just stopped caring. But, the Ascension just, weren't ready. They hadn't proved themselves to be interesting to the fans. And I don't think the New Day really has either, even though they're doing a lot better than they had before. But, still, I have an open mind. Let's see where this goes. I presume Cesaro and Kid will chase the belts, and that will lead to their official face turn. But once again, I'm not sure if I want that. The match itself, it was really good, actually. I really liked it. There was a lot of, hardcore, dangerous-looking spots that made me cringe. Like, at one point, I think Big E spears Tyson Kidd through the ropes. I've seen him do that spot before, but for some reason, when he does it this time, it just looked so much more brutal and intense. I thought it was interesting how, in most matches, usually when a strong guy fights a high flyer, the strong guy is only really there to showcase the skills of the high flyer. However, usually that's when the high flyer is the good guy, whereas the strong guy is the bad guy. But here it's the total opposite. Like, even when Cena fights Rollins and, Cena's the good guy, it seems like the matches are designed to show how athletic Rollins is, and, Cena's still being used just to showcase, Rollins' abilities, even if Cena ultimately wins. Well, like when Cesaro went up against Kofi Kingston was, showing his athleticism and how, he could get off that turnbuckle and fly. But if anything, it showcased just how cool Cesaro was, how he'd counter that and, boast about his strength. And I thought that was actually an interesting storytelling angle. I very rarely see, high flyers used to be the ones to show off the strong guy. There was also some just real cool moments, like with Cesaro in particular, where he'd pick up Big E. I thought Tyson Kidd, he's an incredibly good performer. Even though I think Cesaro stole the show, he still had his awesome moments too. And the New Day, looked good too. I really think Xavier Woods needs to be utilized better. I want to see him more in these matches, even though at the same time, as the guy who kind of cheats, he works in that role as well. I feel Kofi Kingston's sort of struggling with this heel persona. He doesn't have much of a personality as the bad guy, whereas with Big E and Xavier Woods, they're standing out a lot more. But we'll just have to see where it goes. I thought it was a very entertaining match. Bizarre build-up that represents my problems with the storylines going into Extreme Rules, since the New Day didn't really have much of a feud with Cesaro and Kid. Both of them, if anything, had a feud with Lucha Dragons. So that sort of took out any emotional investment, but it was still a really fun match. And I think it's sort of underrated. in terms of how these matches were all received by general audiences and wrestling critics. Because the general consensus is that it's a solid match, but nothing special. I thought it was special. Oh God, John Cena versus Rusev again, third time. I'm thinking, please let this feud die. And then they announced that they're going to be clashing once more at Payback. Luckily, that one has a much better stipulation, since I Quit matches tend to be more interesting than strap matches, which that's what this is, even though they keep telling me otherwise. So this was a very, very strange storyline, because the focus was on John Cena being a fighting champion who does these open challenges so anybody can come and fight him for the belt. Okay, that's pretty cool. Even though we know John Cena's not going to lose, so once again, it pulls out any emotional investment, but it allows some younger guys to show off their skills before they do inevitably lose. So it's cool seeing Stardust come out. It's cool seeing Barrett come out and fight Cena. It's cool seeing Kane. Oh wait, yeah, Kane came out. Okay, it was not cool seeing Kane doing that. I've seen that matchup way too many times and would have much rathered somebody younger. But like Neville would have been an interesting choice. Other than Ambrose, he did show up and fought Cena, even though it wasn't a great match. So there is things to like about this storyline. The problem is Rusev seems very irrelevant in regards to it. He is not like this dominating presence who shows up just to remind Cena that he's there. No, I think they had 2 major confrontations leading up to this pay-per-view, maybe 3. And Rusev, I think the first time just sort of talked, and then the next few times I think he dominated Cena, which only made it more predictable that Cena would win. And I was right. But once again, I prefer when the storylines are built around 2 people fighting each other. That's at least something their previous build-ups had done right, even though I've never really enjoyed this storyline involving Rusev and Cena. But here it just seems so superfluous. Really the only way I think the United States Open Challenge really could have been more relevant is if this was some sort of battle royale that led to this. But so maybe like you'd have 4 different guys. So one week Stardust would come out, challenge Cena. The next week Ambrose would come out, challenge Cena. And the following week Rusev would come out and challenge Cena. And the pay-per-view card would involve all these people, and therefore it wouldn't be quite so predictable, because even if Cena loses the belt before then, he will go into this match at the pay-per-view at least as a contender or a challenger. So I thought that was crappily written. I thought this was a stupid stipulation. I just did not enjoy this match. It's not a horrible match, but it's, I think, their weakest outing yet. And the problem is just the stipulation is a really bland gimmick. The idea is that you have these 2 strong wrestlers, and they're going to be playing this tug-of-war with this chain for half of the time. And that is more or less what happens. However, they kind of missed a few moments, like where Cena's outside of the ring, Rusev's in the ring, they're both connected by the chain, and Rusev's trying to get to the corners. Cena's holding back. Well, at one point, Cena gets pulled into the ring, but it doesn't really look like Cena's pulling the chain or putting any weight on it. However, Rusev's acting as if Cena's grabbing it and not letting him get to the final corner, or whatever corner he was at. So it was a very bizarre and surreal moment that really drew attention to how fake wrestling is. But otherwise, I just don't think Cena or Rusev have that much chemistry. I've found almost all of their matches to be relatively underwhelming, much like Bray versus Cena. Their best was, I believe, their WrestleMania match, probably. And that was a solid match, but relatively underwhelming compared to the rest of the card. And here, I thought this was just one of the weaker matches. So not only do these guys not have the most chemistry, because in a lot of ways they're very similar and their opposites don't really attract, even though you'd think they were, because Rusev's a powerhouse and Cena's resilient. However, how many times can you see just Rusev stomping on Cena before it gets old? Especially once Cena recovers and overcomes the odds. I hate it when the announcers keep saying how Cena's not going to win this. It just makes it so predictable. We've seen this storyline done since the beginning of Cena's career. He's overcome the odds so many times that whoever he fights is the real underdog. The only time I really felt anything there was when Cena was feuding with Lesnar. Then I felt that, yeah, if Cena comes out on top, he'd be overcoming the odds. But it's just slow-paced compared to the previous outings when you have guys like, Ambrose, Harper, Neville. They're just so much faster and their matches are so much more intense. Here, this is just kind of slow and lethargic. And I hate the stipulation. Not quite as embarrassing as the Kiss Me Arse stipulation, but it's just a boring... very rarely do I like strat matches. Oh god, the Divas match. Another feud that has very little to do with the actual match. So, AJ Lee retired, and Paige went on to do a movie, so they wrote her out on an injury. So that's the only reason why Naomi is here. Otherwise, one of them would have had this spot. And there was no chance Naomi was going to leave this pay-per-view with the belt. I would have been really pissed off and shocked, because like Nikki or not, WWE has presented her as a worthy champion. She's had the belt for like 5 months. Now, is she as good of a worker as Paige or AJ Lee? No, but she has gotten a lot better, and I think she's good enough to where she does deserve the belt. She carries herself in a way that makes you want to hate her. Now, what makes this storyline strange is that I'm not really sure if the Bellas are supposed to be good guys now or good girls now, because it seemed like Naomi went from being a popular face to a heel when she turned on Paige. So you could tell that the audience wasn't really sure who to root for here. I wasn't sure who I was supposed to root for. I think Naomi is a very talented worker, but I feel her moveset really needs work. She's incredibly athletic, she's pretty fast, but her finisher is the rear view, which I think is the worst finisher ever. Well, maybe not ever, but it's up there. It's a comedy finisher. I could accept that, for a mid-carder, somebody like Emma, but not as a potential champion. Whereas Nikki, once again, like her or not, and I don't think Nikki is quite as good of a worker as Naomi, but she at least has a more dangerous looking moveset. The rack attack looks devastating, and Naomi just doesn't have that going for her. It really felt like the only reason Naomi was here was so she could be credible filler, which is what I thought I think Paige was during her last attempt at getting the belt. I don't really remember the storyline that surrounded that. But whoever dethrones Nikki needs to have a real intense and emotional feud with her. There has to be a really good payoff, much like when Daniel Bryan won the World Heavyweight Championship at the last year's WrestleMania. If Batista had won that, it just wouldn't have worked because, it was such an uninvolving storyline. And if Naomi had defeated Nikki, even though some people believe she deserves it more because they like Naomi more, it just wouldn't have been a good payoff. Now, if they continue this feud and Naomi does eventually win, I could buy that. But it would have just been too early for her. And it just seemed like the bulk of the storyline surrounded Naomi and her jealousy with Paige. And I just didn't feel a whole lot of tension between Naomi and Nikki. I still think Brie's eventually going to turn on Nikki as a face, and there would be some payoff to that old storyline, which fucking sucked, but that'll at least make sense of it. But we'll just have to see where they go. The match itself, it was probably the weakest of this card. Not bad, it was just mediocre. Represents what I don't really like about the Divas division. But, you know, what can you do? When Paige and AJ Lee are gone, you're going to have to bring in somebody from NXT, which would be cool if they brought Charlotte or, one of those, real good performers. Or, build up Naomi to be that much better, but that's going to take a lot of work, including a new finish. Not a whole lot I could say there, though. So, the next one, Roman Reigns versus Big Show. So, storyline, I did not like it just because I kept thinking, why isn't Roman Reigns going after Seth Rollins? He screwed him over. That seems like that would be the logical progression. And then you think that the main event for Extreme Rules would be a three-way match between Roman Reigns, Randy Orton, and Seth Rollins. Or maybe they could even throw in Kane in there, even though he'd be filler. At least then you'd feel that maybe the bad guys have more of a chance instead of just Roman Reigns and Randy Orton beating the shit out of Seth Rollins. Or if you just made it a three-way and Rollins somehow came out on top, that would give Seth Rollins more credibility. But instead, Roman Reigns settles for the Big Show for some reason, even though he's beaten Big Show so many fucking times. There's been some good promo work from both men. The whole bit with the choke slam on top of the car impressed a lot of people. It didn't really do anything for me because I'm not really sure how that would hurt anymore. Granted, it's not quite as bad as like when Mark Henry does the world's strongest slam on the Big Show on top of the steel steps, where it's like, wouldn't that make it less painful? But it was just like, that's wrestling for you. But I just, everybody thought this match would suck. I thought this match would suck. And I like Roman Reigns and I love the Big Show. However, much to everybody's surprise, this ended up being the show stealer. Starts off relatively average, better than their previous work because they've had like 4 matches together, maybe more. And for the most part, they've been really, really boring. I mean, the first 2 in particular, I think, are responsible for the fans turning on Roman Reigns because they were just so snooze-inducing. Big Show and Roman Reigns just don't seem to have very much chemistry together. Big Show needs somebody who could lift him up with ease, like John Cena. And Roman Reigns needs somebody whom he could lift up with ease, like Seth Rollins. Their styles just don't mesh. And yet, after the first half of this match, they really start going heavy in spots. And it became kind of awesome. I thought the psychology was on by both men. Big Show came across as the smug, powerful giant. I felt he was more dangerous than he's been for quite some time. Roman Reigns, he took a beating like a champ, much like against Brock Lesnar, even though I'm not sure I care for the whole underdog persona they're trying to attach to him. But unlike Ziggler, who has no sense of timing, he'll act like he's dead 1 second and then leap to his feet perfectly fine the next. Roman Reigns, he felt like he was just, he was legitimately hurt, and he never seemed to forget those injuries throughout the duration of the match. And yet the fact that he persisted really made you get on his side. And the spots themselves were just real brutal. Like when Roman Reigns sets up 2 tables on the outside of the ring and you're wondering, is he going to throw Big Show into that? Because that would be kind of amazing. I'd be really scared for the giant. However, it backfires. Big Show makes a counterattack, and then he choke slams Roman Reigns while he's in the ring, outside of the ring, and through those tables. That was awesome. I thought, once again, both men sold that so perfectly. When Roman Reigns gets up and Big Show's like, holy shit. Perfect storytelling. And it gets better and better as, he gets speared through the table, or then it moves on to the announcer's desk and they start using that. And, I think, I'm not sure I'd say that was necessarily the best match, but because we had such low expectations, it might as well have been, because it was pretty exciting, pretty intense. And I was really thrilled for both Roman Reigns and the Big Show, considering, a lot of people, I think, hate on Roman Reigns a bit too much, and Big Show's begun to get, please retire chants, which are never flattering. That's not the right kind of heel heat. And then, yeah, they ultimately, upstage a lot of these younger, more talented performers, I was thrilled. I thought that was a great, great matchup. I don't want to see a rematch though. Just let it go out on this high note. You're not going to be able to top it. Anything else between these two people is just going to look so lackluster in comparison. So end it here. Focus on Reigns challenging Rollins, which I hear they're doing. I haven't seen the newest Raw yet, but I hear they're going that route. Big Show can maybe take some time off, sell his injuries, which makes Roman Reigns look even more like a badass that he temporarily did retire the Big Show, and then Big Show can come back sometime later and have a new program with somebody else. Before I get into the title match, at one point Bo Dallas came out and got challenged by Ryback, and then just Ryback kicked the crap out of him. I kept expecting Bray Wyatt to show up, but he didn't, and I'm not really sure why this segment was even here outside of filler. They could have easily added that to, another match's time. It's almost like the WWE is reminding us that yes, Ryback is here, but if Bray Wyatt challenged Ryback then came out like after Ryback did his finisher on Bo Dallas, then lights turn dark, Bray Wyatt then is suddenly behind him and attacks him, that would have made this scene relevant. However, instead I hear they do that the following Raw, and I'm not sure why this was needed. I'm not really looking forward to this program anyway. Bray Wyatt needs to beat Ryback. WWE doesn't seem to have any idea how to use Ryback right now, whereas unfortunately Bray Wyatt keeps getting built up in order to be torn down. He will overcome his mini feuds, but whenever Bray Wyatt seems to have that one storyline that could finally propel him to the main event scene, it's just like, nope, not your time yet. And it's really kind of sad because you could tell that the fans aren't quite as into Bray Wyatt as they used to be. You don't hear as many cheers. Actually, I don't really hear any cheers. And also the boos just kind of seem lukewarm. So I don't think they needed that, but whatever. So we finally get to Seth Rollins versus Randy Orton. And there were parts of the storyline that I did like. In fact, of all the storylines, this one felt the most complete, the most relevant. And I did like how they used Kane. I never thought I'd say that again. I thought Kane really did do a great job when he freaked out and was saying how they made Rollins into the champion, and they could have easily done the same thing with Ambrose or El Torito, but there was a certain amount of authenticity to the way he delivered it. You felt that he was just genuinely pissed off and that he wasn't just playing a character. So that was a great moment for Kane. And I like the fact that they're teasing a face turn, but they aren't fully going that route. So you're not supposed to be sure what Kane's going to do. And that adds a certain amount of suspense because otherwise there would be none. We know Rollins is going to leave this pay-per-view with the championship. So it's hard to really feel invested in this feud. But because Kane might turn good, he might turn evil, we're not sure. And that adds a new dynamic to this storyline without having Kane steal, I don't want to say steal the show, but they could have easily made Kane like the focal point, and you're like, you don't want to see Kane as the focal point. I still feel Orton and Rollins are more relevant than Kane within this storyline, but this gives Kane something to do without getting a pay-per-view match. We don't need any of those for quite some time. Thank you very much. However, I personally figured that Kane would just turn out to be a big red herring. It would seem like he might turn face, but he'll ultimately betray Randy Orton and remain as a heel. I think Kane really needs to become a good guy because he's just sort of run out of steam as the bad guy. He doesn't get any reactions anymore, at least up until these past few weeks. However, I was a little surprised that, Kane definitely turned on Orton, but he also attacked Rollins too. So maybe Rollins, or maybe Kane will still turn into a good guy, just not quite yet. One of my issues with this matchup was, okay, Rollins banning RKO is acceptable. It's fine. It is arguably Orton's greatest weapon, even though he should be also worried about the punt. And there are probably other ways Orton could stack, or Rollins could stack the odds in his favor, but then Orton counters with a cage match, and it seems like cage matches are only there in order for somebody to break in when they're not supposed to. And Orton should know this, and he looks incredibly stupid for not realizing this. I mean, Rollins must have been thrilled when he heard this because, I mean, his last cage match was against, I believe, Ambrose, and that's exactly what happened. Bray got in. So that always annoys me. But otherwise, I found this storyline to be pretty compelling. The match itself, though, was just sort of underwhelming. I mean, it's acceptable. It's not a bad match at all. It's better than, Cena versus Rusev, the Divas match. Maybe Neville versus Barrett, but we also had a lot higher expectations. It's not as good as the WrestleMania confrontation. It's not even as good as that one match they had on Raw where Rollins stole the victory, and I think that was the same night when they took out Orton, and he was gone for a few months. But it was still nicely paced enough. It's just there was nothing amazing about it. Nothing that is going to stay within my memory. It's kind of cool when Rollins used the RKO on Orton in order to pick up the win. If that should lead to a very interesting feud if they continue with this later on, because Orton's got to be pissed off. But otherwise, it just... I think we expected too much. So it's sort of a weird contrast with Big Show versus Reigns. We expected nothing from that match, and then it ended up delivering. And I wouldn't necessarily say that in itself it was better than Orton versus Rollins, even though it probably was. It's just that, once again, our expectations sort of benefited us for that match, but worked against us for Orton versus Rollins. And it just ended up being kind of, typical. Good, solid match by both men, but, nothing that pushed the boundaries, nothing that really is going to stay within our memories. It's just sort of there. So that is all I have to say. How long has this gone? 50 minutes. Wow, I think I'm topping myself. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have done written reviews of, the Puppet Master franchise, Scorpion King 4, and I'm about to post a written review of Death Duel of Kung Fu, a 70s Kung Fu movie. So please read all of those. Follow me on Facebook, where I do post written reviews of the various Raws and SmackDowns, as well as also follow me on Twitter. Overall summation for Extreme Rules, it was entertaining but not especially memorable. I thought WrestleMania was better. I did think Extreme Rules was a little bit better than Fastlane. And, actually, I'd say it was quite a bit better than Fastlane, even though Fastlane had some higher moments and much better as a whole than the Royal Rumble. So even though there was nothing groundbreaking, nothing amazing outside of showing that, wow, maybe Big Show and Roman Reigns can have a good match together, Extreme Rules was consistently entertaining. The low points were never that low, and the rest was just all above average, if not outright, exceptionally fun matches. So I think it's worth watching. That's all I have to say. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.